The variety that we're going to look at now is really rather special, and that's because RGT Wolverine is the first UK variety, in fact the first European variety, to bring resistance to the barley yellow dwarf virus. BYDV has, for many of us, almost become a forgotten threat to our cereal crops, and that's because for many years we had good protection from the insecticidal seed treatment deter, which was applied to upwards of 50% of the wheat that's sown in England, and we also had a range of reliable insecticide sprays. That's no longer the case. 3 years on from the revocation of the deter seed treatment and following really difficult conditions in the autumn and winter of 2020 for insecticide applications, the results are unfortunately visible in our cereal crops this spring. It's fortunate then that Wolverine has arrived with a genetic solution to this very real on-farm problem. This is an ideal example of how improvements in plant breeding and seed genetics can be used to provide advantages on farm. For example, we could see lower usage of insecticides when using this resistant variety, which come with savings in machinery and labour costs, and ultimately peace of mind at a busy time of the year. Before we talk about the nitty-gritty of Wolverine as a variety though, we're going to go over to a trial a little bit further up the field where we can talk about and indeed see what BYDV resistance means. So we're now standing in the middle of our winter wheat BYDV trial, and this trial is the 4th consecutive year of collaborative work with the seed breeder RAGT, which aims to identify, test and build protocols for BYDV resistant varieties. What I have behind me here is plots of RGT Wolverine that we were talking about a moment ago, compared with the most widely grown UK variety at the moment, which is this one, Gleam. In the autumn we release aphids into these plots that we know to carry strains of the barley yellow dwarf virus. The aim is to monitor symptoms and the impact on crop development and ultimately on yield from any virus infection. Now what you can see from these two plots here is that Gleam on the right hand side of the screen has clearly picked up quite a high level of virus infection, and that's been visible throughout most of the growing season. Wolverine, by contrast, which has received exactly the same treatment and the same release of aphids, has remained free of symptoms and virus infection. This pattern mirrors what we've seen in previous seasons as well, with susceptible varieties from the recommended list regularly picking up infection and that having a clear impact on subsequent yield. In fact, last year, Gleam in particular suffered an 18% yield loss as a result of virus infection, and that's actually fairly mild. We have seen yield losses as high as 50 or 60% in extreme infection scenarios. By contrast, Wolverine in those seasons has seen no impact on yield from virus pressure. So we really are able to see for our own eyes the impact of the resistance genetics that exist within this variety, and it's also clear that that resistance has a direct knock-on for Wolverine's yield, where it performs much better compared to susceptible varieties in virus situations. This pattern of infection can be seen throughout the trial that we have here today, even in some of the plots where we used a single insecticide spray. The unfortunate truth is that aphid activity was high enough and the weather was warm enough for long enough that many of our cereal crops will have been infected even where an insecticide was used. So what this trial's work is showing us is that we can use RGT Wolverine and these resistance genetics in situations where we would expect BYDV pressure to be high. The crop gives us a level of peace of mind and means that we can concentrate on establishment, cultivation, early nutrition at a busy time of the year without worrying about catchy spray windows and getting our insecticides onto vulnerable crops. Let's head back to the variety trial then and look at RGT Wolverine in a little more detail. Now, you might expect that a landmark genetic advancement like BYDV resistance would come with a significant trade-off in yield. Fortunately, that's not the case with Wolverine. In fact, Wolverine, with 102% of controls on the recommended list, is very much on a par with some of our most widely grown feed wheats. If we look at the top 10 wheat varieties sown in 2020, Wolverine actually out-yields 6 of them. So this isn't a compromised variety, it's a high-yielding feed option. Another advantage for Wolverine as a tool in the fight against BYDV is that this is a variety which is well suited to early drilling. It's in early drilled crops that we see the highest pressure and exposure to the aphids that carry the virus. So knowing that we can put Wolverine into that situation is a great way of maximising the value of these new resistance genetics. Wolverine has stiff straw, which we would look for in an early drilling variety, and is also fairly slow and semi-prostrate with a growth habit in the early autumn before starting to develop as we go through into the late autumn period. All of that means that Wolverine shouldn't get too extended when drilled early, and also will have a low lodging risk when we come towards harvest. Wolverine will benefit from standard fungicide programs and use of a PGR. In certain situations a T0 may be required, although looking at the untreated plots here today, Wolverine is still staying very clean under moderate yellow rust pressure. To summarise then, RGT Wolverine and the BYDV resistance genetics that it carries are probably the most significant development in UK plant breeding of the last 20 years. The ability to bring this genetic resistance into our rotation at a time when aphid pressure seems to be increasing and autumns seem to be getting wetter and more challenging for insecticide applications, I think in that setting Wolverine is a really important part of our variety portfolio. I'd recommend that all growers look at where this variety might sit in their rotation for 2021. And if you'd like to understand how these genetics can fit within your rotation, speak to your frontier agronomist or farm trader.